Hey gamers, Treantmonk here. So when it comes to wizard spells, there's 4 spell levels that really speak to me because these are the spell levels where I tend to have the spells that are most fun. They do things that previous levels couldn't do, and they're the ones I tend to look most forward to when I play a wizard. And those are spell levels 3, 4, 5, and 9. Now, today we're going to be talking about tactics for mid-level wizards, and by mid-level I mean levels 5 through 10. So we're going to be talking about 3 of those spell levels today. So this is kind of the sweet spot for me. This is if I'm playing a wizard and you can pick any level of campaign. I don't want to play the super high level stuff as much as I want to play from levels 5 through 10 because these are the fun levels for me. These are the levels where I feel like my wizard isn't overpowered, but just can do so many interesting things that nobody else can do. So let's talk about mid-level tactics today for wizards. Welcome to Treantmonk's Guide to Wizards. So first, let's talk about those spells we already have, those spells we got at levels 1 through 4. So we talked a lot about defensive spells, we talked a lot about utility spells, and we talked about the spells I called big gun spells. And the big gun spells were the ones we use in combat to debilitate our enemies. And I used a lot of examples of spells. I talked about Thunder Wave, I talked about Flaming Sphere, I talked about Web, I talked about Grease, and there's more I didn't talk about as well that I think would fall into that category. But one thing we're going to find by the time we get to level 5 is that certain spells just aren't scaling well anymore. And those tend to be the spells that do damage. And let me explain why. So let's say you have a Thunder Wave spell. Well, Thunder Wave spell, at first level, we would expect it to do about 9 points of damage to any enemies who it hits who fail their saving throw. So 9 points of damage for a first level spell is good damage. Generally, if you're talking about spells by level, I would expect a good spell to do about 9 points per level of the spell. So for a Thunder Wave to do 9 points at level 1 is just fine. But if we try to upcast Thunder Wave, we're going to find it just doesn't measure up. We're not going to keep that 9 per level. So it's not worth scaling. It doesn't scale well. And if we cast it as a first level spell, once we're 5th level or higher, doing 9 points of damage just isn't enough with our action. So it stops being worth our action to cast, so it's probably not worth us even preparing anymore. But there are other spells that will scale well with us. And I think of spells like Grease or Web, or something like Tasha's Hideous Laughter that maybe I wouldn't have considered at lower levels, but now that I'm a higher level, having that single target spell that can debilitate one enemy might be good, because think about this. Let's say you're a 10th level wizard fighting a CR 10 creature. If you target it with a Tasha's Hideous Laughter, cast with a first level spell, and that creature fails their saving throw, they are still incapacitated, and they are still knocked prone. So we're getting the exact same effect we would expect against a CR1 creature when we're first level. So that is good scaling, and we don't have to upcast it. So it's going to continue to be a good spell as we level up. Now, spells get better as we level up. But if we want to save our high level slots and use a lower level slot, we can still have a dramatic impact on a combat by casting a spell like that. But as we get into 5th level and higher, 3rd level spells, 4th level spells, and 5th level spells, I stopped talking about big guns at these levels. Now I'm talking about showstoppers. These are spells that have an amazing and dramatic impact on a combat. Now in general, if I'm going to be using a slot of 3rd level or higher, when I'm around these levels, I want it to affect multiple creatures. Because again, we can totally take out a single creature even with an area of effect spell at these levels. So the problem with a spell that only targets one creature is if you attack only one creature and you cast that spell and they make their saving throw, nothing happens. And if you have multiple creatures, then that spell isn't all that useful. Well, if I use a spell like, say, Hypnotic Pattern, I can still take out that one creature if they fail their saving throw. Or essentially, you are going to incapacitate them, give the party a chance to do any buffing they want, any healing they want, get in the right position, get that tactical advantage so the fight is assured to win. But if there's multiple creatures, we can take out several of them at the same time, allowing us to essentially separate our enemies. So then we can take out the ones that weren't affected by the spell, and then one by one take out the ones that were affected by the spell. So that's kind of the reason why I kind of look at area of effect spells as being superior for these levels. Now, when I talk about wizard tactics, I tend to be talking about buffing, debuffing, and battlefield control. So buffing, I'd be talking about spells like haste or polymorph, where we're taking an ally and just making them much more powerful. Now, the advantage of something like this is there's no saving throw. We don't have to worry about legendary resistances or magic resistances. We don't have to worry. Our enemies usually won't counterspell a spell like that if that's available to them, but it can often give our party just that little tactical nudge, that little bit to give them the advantage in the combat. When I'm talking about battlefield control spells, I'm talking about spells like, say, a Sleet Storm spell that we're going to talk about with our level 3 spells. Now, a Sleet Storm spell is going to take a group of enemies and essentially separate them, because getting through a sleet storm is difficult. It's difficult terrain, they don't have visibility, and they might be falling prone. So when you have a group of enemies and you can hit them all with a sleet storm spell that has a massive area, so it can be a lot of enemies, what tends to happen is that group of enemies that was all one group that was going to be tough for us, they're going to kind of trickle through. And as they trickle through, we can take them out as they come through. And again, we're talking about a divide and conquer style of play. And the third kind of spell is the debuff spell. And that's something like a hypnotic pattern. So you get your group of enemies, you cast hypnotic pattern on all of them. And let's say there's 10 of them. So 5 of them make their save, 5 of them fail their save. Then we're going to concentrate on the 5 that made their save, get rid of them. Then do any healing we need to do, get any positioning we need to do, and then we can take out the last 5 one at a time. So what about blasting? Do we want to do blasting at all? I say yes. We want to do some blasting at this point too, because there are really good blasts. And the blast, of course, that we all want to talk about is Fireball. Because Fireball, when you're a level 5 character, Fireball is going to be doing about 28 points of damage if an enemy fails their save. So how much damage is that? Well, about 9 points per level of spell. So that's what we would expect from a good spell. But unlike something like a Thunderwave, we've also had some scaling in terms of area of effect and range. So we're doing just as much damage per level of spell, but better range, better area of effect. So far more effective for our level. So as a 5th level character, when we cast Fireball, we would expect a dramatic impact, especially if we can hit several enemies at once. If we're only attacking one creature, doing 28 points of damage on a failed saving throw, 19 points of damage on a successful saving throw, actually probably isn't worth a 3rd level slot. I would say that a Fireball that doesn't affect 3 or more creatures isn't a Fireball that I'm looking to cast. I'm looking to cast a Fireball when I can hit many creatures with it. And if you can hit many creatures with it at levels 5 or 6, you're going to find that a Fireball does an insane effect on a combat. You can often have like 10 creatures, hit them with a Fireball, and 6 of them are dead. And suddenly you have 4 injured creatures limping into combat, and it's over. That's the kind of effect Fireball can have. The thing about Fireball is this: it scales terribly. So once we get past level 6 into level 7, suddenly that damage isn't going up anymore unless we scale the spell. But if we scale the spell to 4th level, we're not doing 9 points of damage per spell level anymore. Now we're doing about 8 points of damage per spell level. And if we scale it to level 5, now we're doing 7 points of damage per spell level. So the damage is scaling downward. And in addition, we're not increasing our area, we're not increasing our range. So the spell's just getting weaker and weaker and weaker, while our enemies are getting stronger and stronger and stronger. So that impact is just going to get worse and worse and worse. So Fireball, level 5, level 6, great spell. Level 7 and higher, it starts to become not so great. So we'll look at some alternatives to Fireball today as to give us some options in combat. But let's talk about area of effect first. So here we have our party. You'll see I put my wizard into the middle of that party. Now, that's not always an option. Sometimes you're single file. Sometimes there's other characters that would love to be in the middle with you. Sometimes characters don't want to be on the front, or they all want to be at the front. So it doesn't always work out this nicely. This is kind of the ideal, in my opinion, because we have our wizard right in the middle. So no matter what side our enemies come at, they're going to hit other allies before they hit us. So let's say this party is moving forward and we're attacked. We'll say a group of trolls attack. You see there's some trees over to the right, so they come rushing out of the trees. So in this case, we're going to say they're a bunch of trolls. So they could be anything. But a bunch of trolls have come out of the trees. It's now initiative. And let's say we win initiative. So how effective would we expect an area of effect spell to be? So if our wizard wins initiative, they could put an area of effect spell right here, something like a fireball. And this area is the area the fireball would affect. So we could see it would hit every single troll in the area. So that's 6 trolls. So if we think about that, 28 points of damage on a failed saving throw times 6. That's how much damage you're doing. So if we were to say that maybe half these trolls made their saving throw, we're still talking about 125, 126 points of damage to these trolls in total. That's a good amount of damage to be doing with a 3rd level spell. Now trolls are a CR5 creature, so 6 trolls against a group of 5th level or 6th level characters is a really, really tough fight. So we want to be using our biggest, most powerful spells in this case. Now I want to consider that 28 points of damage to a troll that has 84 hit points means that after this fireball goes off, all those trolls are still just fine. They're lightly injured, ready to move in and attack our allies. Now, we have prevented their regeneration for a round, but that's really it. So we've lightly wounded them, and then on their turn, they're going to attack our allies, all 6 of them. So let's for a moment say that we didn't cast a fireball. Instead, we cast a hypnotic pattern. So hypnotic pattern is going to cover the exact same area. So we're still affecting 6 trolls. Now let's say that this hypnotic pattern affects half the trolls. So we're going to say that maybe, I don't know, this one, and this one fail their saving throw. So on their turn now, only 3 trolls can move in to attack our allies. So that means what we've done is we've taken the offensive power of these trolls and cut it in half. Now our allies can attack these 3 trolls. We're going to have to maintain our concentration to keep those other 3 trolls out of the fight. So now our allies are fighting 3 trolls, eventually 2 trolls, eventually 1 troll. And then once all those trolls are gone, then our allies just have these 3 trolls to deal with. If we have any allies who are down, we can go help them, get them back up. We have 10 rounds to take care of this. So if it took us, say, 5 rounds to get rid of those 3 trolls, we still have 5 rounds to prepare before these 3 trolls can act again. But we want to attack them before that runs out, because it's going to take us maybe a round or 2 to take out a troll, even if we're attacking them from incapacitated. So we're going to attack these trolls 1 at a time or 2 at a time if the time's running out. And that makes it just so much easier to finish these ones off. And then finally, 1 final troll. So again, we're talking about dividing and conquering our enemy. That's how I figure the best tactic is for wizards in combat. Now, while we are maintaining our concentration on the hypnotic pattern, there's not a whole lot we can do. If we think we might be targeted with an attack, a dodge action is a really good idea. We might also want to position ourselves as far away from the enemy as possible. Other than that, we can contribute with cantrips. We might want to use a firebolt to inhibit trolls' regeneration and add a tiny bit of damage. Again, cantrips don't do good damage, but it's better than nothing. Now, we could throw in a fireball as well to do a little bit more damage, but we got to be careful with that, because a fireball could mess up your hypnotic pattern. Because if you're hitting creatures that are currently mesmerized by the hypnotic pattern, it snaps them out of it. So we don't want to be doing that. So things like fireball can be dangerous in a situation like this. Now let's go back and say we cast something like a sleet storm on these trolls. What would the effect be? So we cast our sleet storm. And I guess the first thing I would like to point out is a lot of people don't appreciate just how huge a sleet storm is. So here it is cast on the battlefield, and I'm just going to zoom out here. So zoomed out, this is the sleet storm, and you can see it would actually go off the back of the map. It doesn't even fit on the map. That's how huge a sleet storm is. So a sleet storm is actually effective against massive quantities of creatures. But we're easily able to take all 6 of these trolls in that area. Now what you might see is that I've cut the front of this effect halfway down where the first trolls are. And this isn't a mistake. So at the beginning of their turn, these trolls are going to have to make a dexterity save or fall prone. So again, let's say half of them fail. We'll say maybe this guy, and this guy. So they fall prone. So now we have 3 that can act normally on their turn. So this guy can now move out, and he's going to come attack our party. Now these guys back here, they might move much, much slower because they're going through heavy obscurement and difficult terrain. So each square counts as 3. So that is 15 feet, 30 feet. His movement's now done. Now he could dash, so now he's going to go 45 feet, 60 feet, and he's done. He has used his action, he's used his movement. Nothing more he can do. He cannot get to the party. Same thing here. We're going to look at 15 to 30. Now he can go 35, 40, 45, 50, 55, 60. He could get to the party. Now the other 3 have all fallen prone. Now on our turn, our characters can move up to this one up here, and they can attack it from prone, which is going to give them advantage on their attack rolls. So another advantage, that's why I went halfway down in terms of where I put the spell effect. So these characters down here are dealing with these 2 trolls. These 2 characters up here are going to attack a prone troll, and then we have another troll up here. On the following round, now on their following round, all 4 of these trolls are going to have to make another saving throw or fall prone. Or if they're prone, I assume they just stay prone. So now we're looking at probably 2 of them that are prone. And so again, we're splitting the enemy again. Bit by bit, those enemies are going to trickle out. And what it does is it takes their offense and then it just divides it by 2 or 3 each round compared to what it would be. So our party takes just a tiny amount of damage compared to what they would have if we hadn't had a wizard in the party. But let's say our wizard doesn't win initiative. What happens then? Well, what's going to happen is those trolls are going to rush in and our party's going to rush to meet them. And what we end up with is this chaotic melee looking something like this. So can we cast a Sleet Storm here and be effective? No. If we cast a Sleet Storm here, we're affecting our own party as well as the trolls. Same thing with the Fireball. Same thing with a Hypnotic Pattern. None of those spells can really help us here. We might be able to catch 1 or 2 on the outside. In this particular case, I can see how we might get 1 on the outside. And taking 1 out of 6 isn't making a big deal for our party. So what do we do in these kind of situations? Well, this is when I say it's important to have area of effect spells that don't have friendly fire. So this is where I look at a spell like Slow. If I cast a slow spell in this situation, I can affect all 6 trolls. And so what happens is these trolls normally have 3 attacks around. They've had their offense cut by 2/3. In addition, they can't take reactions, bonus actions, so we've really reduced their impact. Now, they get a saving throw every round, so maybe on the next round, 1 more of them isn't slowed, and maybe on the next round, none of them are slowed. And then we're going to want to cast another spell, maybe another slow spell. But that's the thing. The main thing is we've had rounds where we have reduced their offense significantly, and that gives our party a fighting chance. And that's not as effective as if we had won initiative. And that's why I always say that when you're playing a character that is a god wizard style character, initiative is so important. We just can't be guaranteed to win initiative all the time. So when we can't win initiative, having spells that can affect our enemies, like the slow spell, is super important. Now, one tactic that's often mentioned to me by people commenting on my videos or on my guides previously, they figure that a good tactic for wizard preparations is to look at the spells and what saving throw they offer, and then target different saving throws with different spells. So if you're in a combat where you expect a creature to have a good Constitution saving throw, you might target Wisdom instead. If you think they might have a good Wisdom saving throw, you might target Dexterity instead. If you think all 3 of those saving throws might be good, something like a Phantasmal Force might target Intelligence instead. So then no matter what you're fighting, you can look at what you think their weak saving throw is, or if you know it, and then target that weak saving throw. And I just don't think that's realistic. And it's partially my fault, partially the fault of other wizard guides, and that we don't really talk about preparations. We say these spells are good, these spells aren't good, so make a spell list with the good spells. And then we give an idea of what kind of tactics wizards should do, battlefield control, buffing, debuffing, but we don't really talk about spell preparations. And spell preparations, when we looked at low-level wizards, were no problem at all. In fact, if you remember, our first-level wizard had more preparations than they had spells they could cast. That's no longer the case. As we go up in levels, preparations get harder and harder, because we're really only getting 1 additional preparation per level, even though we're getting 2 spells per level. So just because you can put these spells in your spell book doesn't mean you can prepare them all. So if we're going to put spells in our spellbook that target wisdom, and target dexterity, and target constitution, and maybe some kind of option to target intelligence, and then we want battlefield control, and then we want area of effect spells that maybe might have the chance of friendly fire, but they have a dramatic effect. Then we want spells that affect combat where there's no friendly fire, but they're still going to target several enemies. And then we also want to have spells that cover our defense. And then we want to have spells for maneuverability. Well, how many spells do you think we get? We don't get that many. So we're going to talk about spell preparation in detail here. Now, I should also mention that wizards can take spells from spellbooks and scrolls and then put them in their spellbook. So they may have a whole lot of spells to choose from. Or you might be in a campaign where you just don't get that opportunity. So then you're going to get 2 spells per level. And that'll end up being 4 spells of each spell level, or thereabouts. So then we really have to also think about what spells are going to level with us. In campaigns like that, that's a point where I really would look at something like Fireball and think about whether I really want to have that. Because if I'm not going to be preparing Fireball anymore when I'm 8th or 9th level, can I afford to pick it at 5th level when I could take a spell like Hypnotic Pattern that I will continue to prepare right up into high levels? So those kind of details, I've been asked about that very recently. I'm going to talk about them more when I do my videos on spells by level. In the meantime, let's take a look at a 6th level wizard. Now this 6th level wizard, I'm going to say, has a spellbook that's just a 6th level wizard's dream. Has all kinds of options here for us. So let's take a look. Now this is a wizard that started out with a 16 intelligence, then took Warcaster at level 4 as their feat, so they still have a 16 intelligence at level 6. So what spells are we going to prepare? Let's take a look. So here's our 3rd level spells. So let me demonstrate the problem with this idea that we're going to target all these different saving throws as well as have the various effects we would want with the wizard. So let's look at our 3rd level spells first. So we're going to take Counterspell for sure, because if we're going to come across enemy spellcasters, we're the one who can prevent them from fireballing the party. Second, we're going to want Fireball, because Fireball targets dexterity and it's an area of effect spell, so very useful. Hypnotic Pattern, best spell in the game for 3rd level spells, so we definitely want that one. How about Slow? Do we want that one? For sure. Because again, if we get in a chaotic melee, Slow is going to give us a chance to target many enemies. And finally, Stinking Cloud, do we want that? Well, yeah, it targets Constitution. We haven't targeted Constitution yet, we better grab that up. So then we're going to go into our 2nd level spells. So we still probably want a big gun spell, right? So better grab Web. Web will allow us to save some of those 3rd level slots because we have a limited number of those, and it's still going to have a reasonable effect on combat. Phantasmal Force is only going to target a single enemy, but it's going to target intelligence, and we definitely want to do that. Misty Step, that's going to be important for maneuverability, so we better grab that one. And then Mirror Image, we want to layer up our defenses, so Mirror Image is important, and it doesn't use concentration. Very useful spell for that. And then we're going to get into our 1st level spells, and then we're going to take our Mage Armor, of course. Oh wait, no we're not. We're out of spells. We have no more preparations, because we had 9 preparations and we've used them all. So that means no Absorb Elements, no Mage Armor, no Shield. Do we want to do that? No, we don't want to do that. We have to give up something if we're going to do this tactic where we're going to target different saving throws. Now we could do that. Maybe we'll give up spells like Slow, because maybe we're just going to hope that we can get creatures before they end up in a chaotic melee. Maybe we're okay without layering our defenses like with a Mirror Image. Maybe we're okay with not having the maneuverability of a Misty Step. We could do that. I don't recommend doing that. But what I don't hear from people who make those suggestions is what exactly from what a wizard should take at these levels are you willing to give up in order to do this tactic? So how would I prepare my spells with a 6th level wizard? Well, this is what I would do. At 1st level, with my 1st level spells, I'm going to want to save those slots for defense. And so for preparations, I'm going to prepare my good 1st level defensive spells. And there's 3 of them. They are Absorb Elements, Mage Armor, and Shield. So Mage Armor is going to give me a decent armor class with a shield that I can do as a reaction, a reasonably good armor class, and Absorb Elements is going to give me a chance to get resistance to any energy damage that I'm targeted with. At 2nd level, the first one I'm going to grab is Mirror Image. And the reason I'm going to do that is because it layers up my defenses. Mirror image will use an action, so I'm not necessarily doing it in every combat, but anytime I have a chance to prepare for a combat, I'm always going to throw a mirror image up because it doesn't use my concentration. And basically what it's going to do is it's going to take 3 attacks that would otherwise hit my wizard, and they're going to miss instead. Then I'm going to want a Misty Step just for maneuverability, can get me out of some sticky situations, only uses a bonus action. And finally, I'm going to want to retain at least one big gun spell, the first or second level spells that actually target our enemies and do something to them. So there's really 2 options here, Levitate or Web. I'll go ahead and take Web. I might take Levitate depending on the kind of campaign I'm in. Remember that Levitate has some versatility because we can cast it on ourselves as well. And then with our 3rd level spells, I'm going to want Counterspell because I'm a wizard. If we're targeted with enemy spells, I'm going to want to be able to stop that. I'm going to take Hypnotic Pattern because Hypnotic Pattern I think is the most effective spell for 3rd level spells in the game. And I'm going to take Slow. So in those cases where I'm in a chaotic melee, Web's not going to do it for me. Hypnotic Pattern's not going to do it for me. What am I going to do in combat? I'm going to cast a Slow spell. And that's my preparations. They're all done. So that's how I would prepare my spells. Now I'd like to talk about how your role outside of combat is going to change when you get to 5th level, because there's going to become some ritual spells available to you that are just insanely good. And what I would do is, if I'm 5th level, the first spell I'm going to take is Hypnotic Pattern. The second spell I'm going to take isn't Slow. I'm going to hold off to 6th level to get Slow. At 5th level, I'm going to grab Leomund's Tiny Hut, because Leomund's Tiny Hut is the best way to take a long rest in the game. If you are going to take a long rest, you can use Leomund's Tiny Hut as a ritual, which means you don't have to prepare it. And it is going to give you, after 10 minutes, a dome of impenetrable force for which you and your party can safely rest. I'm not going to give you the entire description of the spell right now. Basically, I'll just say that nothing can get in, you can get out, you can see out, nothing can see in. And no matter what weather it is outside, you're comfortable inside. So if you are taking a long rest, the effect of Leomund's Tiny Hut cannot be overstated. So I absolutely am going to grab that at 5th level, even though it's going to hold off Slow for another level after that. Now after that, another spell that I think really speaks to me at 3rd level is Water Breathing, because Water Breathing is a 24-hour spell that can affect you and your entire party as a ritual. You don't have to prepare it. So at the beginning of every day, if you can invest 10 minutes, the entire party has Water Breathing all day. So you can do this all day, every day. Now, am I going to take that at 6th level? Probably not. Probably at 6th level, what I'm going to take is Counterspell and Slow. So it really kind of depends on your campaign. You might be able to get it another way, or maybe later on it might be something you grab. Maybe higher levels is when your campaign takes to underwater adventures. It depends on the campaign. But in general, the first 4 spells I'm going to take with my 3rd level spells are Leomund's Tiny Hut, Hypnotic Pattern, Slow, and Counterspell. So as we move into 7th and 8th level, number 1, we're going to access to 4th level spells. And the 4th level spell that is the biggest impact on combat, in my opinion, is Polymorph. Because with Polymorph, you can turn your allies into creatures that are going to have well over 100 hit points and still have good offense. So when you have an ally who has taken a lot of damage, you can cast it on them, and instead of them having to run away from combat, you give them a massive quantity of hit points, make them effective in combat, and if enemies attack them, those hit points are basically extra hit points. Anytime they attack them, that's another party member that doesn't take that damage. And as soon as the polymorph is gone, all those lost hit points don't need to be healed. The other spell I find super effective in combat is Dimension Door. So let me give you an example of how Dimension Door would work. So here's our chaotic melee again with the trolls. And in this combat, our wizard has noticed that our fighter right there, our dwarven fighter, he's down to about 5 hit points left. Now, I could cast Polymorph on him, but maybe I'm holding on to a slow on some of these trolls. So these trolls are already debuffed. I've used my concentration, and I'd have to drop that in order to polymorph that dwarf. So what am I going to do? I'm going to move to the dwarf, and then I'm going to cast Dimension Door. And then once I cast Dimension Door, we're both gone, far away from the combat. That dwarf can now draw a bow or contribute in some other ranged combat method. I can maintain my concentration on my slow spell and contribute as well with things like cantrips or firebolts or those kinds of things. And I've saved the fighter. Now that troll that was attacking the fighter has to find another target instead. What this can do is it can just straight out save party members. You can also do it to a party member that's been downed, especially if you're in a campaign where a DM has no qualms about targeting a PC who's down. Then you really need to get them out of there right away. Dimension Door is a great way for you to do that without breaking your concentration. But what you need to be thinking about at this level especially, we're talking about levels where we now have double-digit number of leveled spells in combat. So we're going to be having combats, we're going to be casting several different spells. So what do we want to be thinking? What am I going to be concentrating on? What am I going to be using my actions for? What am I going to be using my bonus actions for? And what am I going to be using my reaction on? So when you've got the answers to these 4 questions, just remember, once you've decided what you're concentrating on, that takes all the rest of the concentration spells off the table, unless you drop your concentration. Now, if you do something like a slow spell, and maybe you targeted 6 creatures and only 2 failed their saving throw, and then the following round, maybe only 1 has failed their saving throw, so you have 1 slowed creature, maybe it's not worth maintaining your concentration. Maybe you want to drop your concentration at that point and cast maybe another slow spell, or maybe there's enough in the open that you might hit him with a hypnotic pattern. So you can think about these kinds of things, but always keep in mind, what am I concentrating on? Because once you decide, that's it. You can only concentrate on one thing at a time. What can I do with my bonus action? What can I do with my reaction? What can I do with my action? And if you can't answer these questions, it's something to think about when you level up and you're choosing your spells. I've got nothing I can do with my bonus action. Maybe when I go up, I should look at spells that use bonus actions and pick one of them. And it's going to give me something to do with my bonus action. Now, as we move into 7th level and 4th level spells, another kind of spell is going to come up that is now available to wizards that's a good choice. And those are summoning spells. Now, when it comes to summoning, the best spells for summoning tend to be druid spells. So the druids are doing really well with summoning. They've got conjure woodland beings, they've got conjure animals, and we don't have access to as many good summoning spells. But we do have access to some summoning spells. We have, of course, the summon elemental spells, and we also have things like summon greater demon. And now the advantage of something like a summon greater demon is we can cast it with 1 action. That means we can put it where we want it in a combat. But the downside is that it's hard to keep control of that demon. With a conjure elemental, we can keep control of that elemental as long as we maintain our concentration. But because we have to cast it beforehand, it's not necessarily positioned in the combat the way we want. Now, what do we want from a summoning spell? Well, we want to use it to keep our enemies away from us. We want to use it to eat up enemy attacks. We want to use it to prevent their attacks. And ultimately, we want to use it to do damage to our enemies as well. So these are the things you should look at when you're doing a summoning spell. How am I going to position that summon so that it takes the enemy attacks, so that it keeps the enemies from getting to the party or to my wizard, and that it can still do damage without it turning on us. And I think the most important thing to remember is that summons are intended to be expendable. Never be worried about damage to your summoned creatures. Buffing a summoned creature's defenses is just crazy talk to me. I want the summoned creature to be a tempting target to the enemy. Low armor class, great. Big, easy to hit, takes lots of damage, perfect. That is going to keep your enemies attacking the summoned creatures instead of you. Because when those summoned creatures are gone, no loss. Now we're just going to cast another spell that we can concentrate on. Also, when we have this many spells, we need to start thinking about when we're going to go into a combat that we know is going to be tough, and we're going to have a chance to prepare. What are we going to prepare? And it's all about, in my opinion, layering your defenses. So looking for defensive spells that don't use your concentration is key here. And the ones that I'm thinking of, Fire Shield and Mirror Image. These are the spells that you can layer up before combat begins that are going to make you very hard to damage in combat. And most importantly, they're not going to hinder your offense in any way. So why is layering defenses so important? And it's all about concentration. If we take damage in combat, we are making concentration saves. If we take a lot of damage in combat, we are making concentration saves that are difficult to make. And we maybe took Warcaster at level 4. That might give us advantage, but that's not a guarantee. Advantage does not guarantee success. What we really want to do is avoid taking damage whenever we can. And when we can't avoid taking damage, we want it to be as little as possible. So how are we going to prevent taking damage? Well, obviously spells like Mage Armor, Shield, Mirror Image, they're all going to help us maintain our concentration. But in addition, you got to be thinking about where you're sitting in a combat. If you are sitting in a position where you can be easily targeted with area of effect by other archers maybe, then that might be a concern if you think somebody has that kind of spell. On the other hand, if you get too close and you think a creature could get to you and do damage to you, that might be a problem. So you have to think about where on the battlefield is the best spot for you. Next thing, don't underestimate the dodge action, even at these levels. If I'm concentrating on a super effective spell, let's say I've taken my party rogue who was almost down, turned him into a giant ape with a polymorph, and now I'm concentrating on that. If I lose that concentration, not only have I taken damage, but in addition, I put the rogue in jeopardy because they probably put themselves right back in the middle of things. And if they were, say, really injured when I cast polymorph, now they're in all kinds of trouble. So maintaining that concentration is so important. Don't be casting a firebolt when you could be doing the dodge action. Now, as we move up to levels 9 and 10, we're going to start to see a dramatic impact on the power of spells versatility. Because, yes, Hypnotic Pattern is a great area of effect spell, although it does have friendly fire. And Polymorph is a great buff spell on a single ally and a decent debuff on a single enemy. But at level 5, we start to get spells that can do all kinds of things. And I'm thinking of spells like Bigby's Hand, which we can use to control the battlefield. We can use it to debuff enemies. We can use it to do damage. We can use it defensively. Spells like Synaptic Static that can target a number of enemies, do damage to them, and deliver a debuff to all of them. So we're going to see more and more spells that can do multiple things. So grab those up. Grab up a couple of those. So when we can do both a debuff and a blast, that's great. And when we have a spell like Bigby's Hand that can do many different things depending on our need, that is also great. And when we have a spell that like Animate Objects that can do massive quantities of damage using our bonus action, maybe we don't have anything else to do with our bonus action, but can also be used in all kinds of utility situations or used in defensive situations, essentially being a summon spell for us so that it might block enemies, it might draw their attacks. All these things, when we have those versatilities, then no matter what kind of combat we end up in, we have something we can apply. So what am I going to prepare when I'm a 9th level wizard as compared to a 6th level wizard? Let's look at that. So in this case, I've taken the same wizard, but now I've given them an 18 intelligence because they bumped up their intelligence at level 8. So at 9th level, we have 13 spell preparations. So that's not that many. We have 5 levels of spells. So that is less than 3 spells per level. The first level spells I'm going to prepare is exactly the same. I'm going to take Absorb Elements, I am going to take Mage Armor, and I'm going to take Shield. At 2nd level, we need Mirror Image so we can layer up our defenses, Misty Step for maneuverability. Our 3rd level spells, we will definitely want Counter Spell. We will definitely want Hypnotic Pattern. Hypnotic Pattern remains effective at higher levels. And something like a Slow is a decent choice at this point, but I think we have some other options we can do in those chaotic melees now. So I'm not convinced Slow is necessary anymore. Moving into our 4th level spells, something like an Arcane Eye is really useful to have from a utility point of view. And Arcane Eye is the kind of spell that could give you advantage tactically in combat because if you know it's coming, you can prepare for it. I believe I mentioned why Dimension Door was really good and why Polymorph is really good, and I'm going to take both those. Now, Autoluke's Resilient Sphere, Greater Invisibility, Summon Greater Demon, all great spells. Here's the thing, I'm going to have 2 4th level spells to cast. So do I really want to prepare a bunch more 4th level spells? No, at this point, I might look back at my 2nd level spells. Look for a big gun spell, like a web, and prepare that instead. And finally, our 5th level spells. And the 2 I'm going to take at 9th level animate object, and wall of force. Now, it's not always going to be these two. Sometimes it might be Bigby's hand and wall of force, but it's pretty much always going to be wall of force. And I haven't talked about wall of force yet. Let's talk about it now. So we talked about targeting different saving throws for creatures. We talked about why I'm not always big on spells that target one creature because they might do nothing. Wall of Force is the answer to that, because Wall of Force create a globe around an enemy. They get no saving throw against it. Now you can create a dome with a radius of up to 10 feet, so that's effectively 20 feet across. So can we take a huge creature and contain it within a Wall of Force? We should be able to. A gargantuan creature, probably not. But once that creature is contained within it, they can't use a dispel magic on it. They really can't get out by any means, and there's no saving throw. So as we move into these levels, and around 9th level, we're going to start to see creatures that have legendary saving throws. That means if they fail a saving throw, they can choose to succeed instead. What I constantly hear about are tactics to burn off those legendary resistances. For me, what I think is hit them in a wall of force. Then they don't get a saving throw. Let them keep their legendary resistances. Let me give you an example. So here's our party again. You can see we're going to face these same trolls. Maybe they're ice trolls this time, and maybe they're being led by a huge white dragon. Now, a huge white dragon is probably an adult. It means it probably has legendary saving throws. It's going to do massive damage if it can get us with its breath weapon. A breath weapon that these trolls, if they're ice trolls, might be immune to. So what would normally happen in the combat like this is we'd roll initiative, everyone's going to jump into combat, and this dragon is just going to be a major pain in our butt because the trolls are going to engage us all in melee, and then this dragon's going to breathe on us, then it's going to fly up, and maybe it'll come down if it recharges its breath weapon, breathe again, or maybe do some attacks with claws and tail and then sweep off again, and then it's going to constantly be doing legendary actions. Every time somebody else goes 3 times around, it's going to do an additional attack, and it's going to be a huge problem for us. We might be almost dead before we ever take this dragon on. Or on round 1, the wizard encases the dragon in a wall of force. Now all of a sudden it's stuck. It can do nothing. There is no way a white dragon's going to get out of a wall of force. So what's going to happen now is the party's going to take on these trolls, unhindered by a dragon. What we're going to do with our wizard, we're going to move him back. We're going to get him away from the trolls, maintain our concentration, take the dodge action if we're worried at all. We can also use things like Misty Step or Dimension Door to get away if that's a problem. But we definitely don't want to lose our concentration. Let the party deal with the trolls. Once the trolls are dealt with, we can lick our wounds. We can surround the dragon. Now it can't just fly off. We're all around it. Ready to actions. Now we drop the wall of force. Combat's over. So wall of force basically gives you a way to just win the combat without a saving throw to the enemy. And that white dragon dies with all 3 legendary resistances intact. So those are the kind of tactics that start coming into play around 9th level. As we move into high levels, they become kind of a standard tactic for us. At this level, it's like once per day. But as we move into 6th, 7th, 8th, and 9th level spells, things, of course, go crazy. And we're going to talk about those crazy things next week when we talk about tactics for high-level wizards. So I hope you join me. Until then, I'm going to sit back and I'm going to relax. And I'm going to have some fun. Because D&D is for everyone. Thanks, guys. And I'll see you next time.